Franco. I am Principal Engineer of BRUNS-PAK. Today is Wednesday, July 31st, and we're going to be talking about the data center facility consolidation assessment, optimizing the process of cloud co-location. We want to make sure that at the end of this presentation, we are addressing items like how does an enterprise start the process of developing a consolidation analysis? Also, we want to talk about the 19 elements of the hybrid solution. Where did they come from? How are they integrated into the comprehensive report? We want to talk about are all software applications candidates for cloud? 4, what does BRUNS-PAK think some critical issues are in data center consolidations? We're going to be reviewing that. And number 5, how do companies engaging in mergers and acquisitions contemplate consolidation? Finally, is there a technology process to deliver the consulting deliverable? Is this vendor neutral? So we're going to be going through that today during the course of it. The WebEx is today from 11 to 11:45. And as you can see, and many of you folks do know me, that we have it pretty structured as far as what we're going to go through and when we're going to go through it. So having said that, let's go to the agenda. The agenda, as you see, is the first part. We're going to be talking about the elements from 11 to 11:10 Eastern. The second, we're going to be talking about the latest trends and considerations of boards, stockholders, owners, trustees, directors, and taxpayers. What are they thinking about? What's the trends going on? Then we're going to talk about that from 11:10 to 11:20. Then we're going to talk about the total cost of ownership versus best practice versus risk. What does that mean? How is it relevant? We're going to talk about that's from 11:20 to 11:25, and then some examples and notes that we're going to discuss from 11:25 to 11:30. We do have an allocation from 11:30 to 11:45 to discuss and go over any Q&A that you might have. In the event that we don't get to all the questions, not any of them, all the questions, we will respond as a follow-up. So let's go on to the 19 elements, and let's talk about that for a second. So when we talk about the 19 elements, this is, in essence, BRUNS-PAK's experience of what boards, trustees, stockholders ultimately look at for their data center consolidation elements. All these elements impact and go through and touch an overall short and long-term strategy in our experience. Again, this is based on BRUNS-PAK's board of director level presentations and the like. And I'll go around the smoke and we'll talk about them each individually. So the elements that all impact a dynamic hybrid data center enterprise solution. One is the facility infrastructure, the enterprise portion of the data center. Certainly is a consideration. Now I'm going to come full circle and go through this and talk about it in a minute. The second is the energy efficiency associated with the data center enterprise. What am I doing? How am I optimizing my consideration for energy efficiency? Recently, we were just called on a consideration for a project in Hawaii where their electrical utility cost is 30 cents per kilowatt hour. Pretty significant. The third element talks about the hardware platforms. What does that mean? Well, it means the densities. We're going to get into that in a bit. What are the densities of the platforms? Are they high performance computing? Are they standard arrays? That's an element that impacts the overall hybrid strategy. Number 4 talks about cloud. How does cloud help me? Internal, external. What's the considerations for that? 5 talks about disaster recovery. Regardless of where I am or where part of my data is, how am I recovering in the event that there's a significant issue? 6 talks about co-location. Co-location being delineated from cloud. How can co-location help me and deliver my solution? 7 talks about migration, relocation. That's an impact because, again, all these 19 elements on a phase 1 consulting engagement combine to issue a report of total cost of ownership versus best practice versus risk. Applications. What type of applications am I running? Number 9, it should be modular, scalable, and flexible with reliability especially. This is extremely critical because in essence, people want to pay as they go. They don't want to CapEx an entire 5-year projected solution when in fact they don't need that sort of superstructure. The communications network is significant now. What does it look like? What are we talking about? And we're going to get into cybersecurity in 17, but there's some significant issues there about who's holding the data and where they're holding it. Service level agreements. Do the companies have them? Are there mandates associated with that? 12, the personnel. Are they outsourced? Are they in-house? CapEx versus OpEx, very key. In essence, in summary, people want to leverage the OpEx portion of wherever they can. Modular data centers. How does that come into play? Do I really even need an enterprise solution? Can I just get a trailer outside to help me with part of it? Government, corporate, university, nonprofit have some significant restrictions associated with how they do their business. Legal repercussions, very significant now. As you can see, it's dominating the news. Dominating the news. What are the legal impacts of hacks? We're going to get into that. Cybersecurity, wow, very high. As a matter of fact, you'll see in one of the examples that we saw just Capital One announcing 100 million people. It's unbelievable. So cybersecurity, how do we prevent that? What do you do with your data? Who's responsible for that? Compliance is dominating as well. By the way, if my data is taken, and there are between HIPAA and a variety of different people, from financial all the way down the line, there are some compliance issues that are getting very significant. And finally, edge computing. So when you look at edge computing and like, these are part of the 19 elements that we're looking at. As we go, and they all combine, in BRUNS-PAK's opinion, to what is total cost of ownership versus best practice versus risk in a vendor neutral way. Let's go on to the next, the critical elements at the board. This is what we have as far as the feedback that we receive from boards. Number one, they're concerned about best practices. Number two is when there's a consultative type of solution coming in, they want vendor neutrality. They don't want it to be biased in any way. Number three, total cost of ownership. They want to understand that. And by the way, when you combine those 19 elements for OpEx versus CapEx versus funding short and long term, very significant. That technology blender of those 19 elements is critical. I want to know what my operating and each year costs are going forward. The modularity, scalability is critical. Risk, boards are dominating now with risk. Schedule of delivery, when can I do this? Cybersecurity focus, you better believe it. Trends, what are the recent trends and uptime associated with these solutions? Needless to say, you saw some devastating events with some airlines that went down. Cybersecurity, again, continued focus. Network, compliance, regulatory. What's going on? How is the government reacting? Damages is coming into play. By the way, the European Act, we're going to talk about that, and the California Act in 2018, we're going to talk about what does that mean, damages. I think Facebook was just recently leveled with a couple $1 billion fine for data privacy. Edge computing, by the way, very critical. There's some manufacturing clients that we have that absolutely have to have that processing closed because it's the most effective way to do it. Legal impacts are significant and various levels of reliability. What level of reliability do you need? Finally, the goal, the mission. Key. In essence, in consolidation to net it out, and even you folks in Scottsdale can understand that. I had to throw that in. The goal, mission, reduce cost, minimize risk, optimize OpEx versus CapEx. Again, if I have an OpEx solution versus capital dollar spending, I want to do that. A modular, scalable, reliable, on-demand service where IT can grow both hardware, software, communications with the facility infrastructure. I'm complying to all the compliance issues. I'm conforming to all the compliance issues. I have regulatory compliance. I have best practice, and I've identified liability. So 11:10. I know you folks are all technical. We're right on time. How do you like that? Part two. Let's talk about the latest trends and consolidations of boards, stockholders, owners, trustees, directors, and taxpayers, because that's really ultimately what it comes down to. So the latest trends are, number one, what we're seeing is cybersecurity continues to evolve and moves to the forefront of many enterprise data center considerations. By the way, why? Brand impact, key. Brand impact. You know, when you see people have to go on ABC News or 60 Minutes, that's not great for stocks. Not being a Harvard graduate, excuse me, Harvard folks, but that's not good. The financial liability of some of the losses are unbelievable. The responsible parties is another issue in cybersecurity. Who's responsible if the data gets hacked? How are they responding to that? What are the boards and trustees' concerns? They are all over cybersecurity. There's people that are very nervous as board of directors right now because they have a fiduciary responsibility to all the stockholders and or a trustee of a university and or a taxpayer. And finally, the risk. So these are all the elements in cybersecurity. The transformation of 2019 data center enterprise solutions encompass a hybrid approach, optimizing total cost of ownership versus risk. So in essence, what we're seeing in our phase one consultative engagements is that the data center enterprise solution in general, again, it's specific to clients, is a hybrid. There is part enterprise solution, there's part co-location, there's part cloud, there's an integration of disaster recovery, and edge computing is another critical element. There's also a modular data center component. Cybersecurity is being absolutely defined where all the different types of data go. The regulatory compliance, they are stepping up to the plate. And if it's a third-party provider, they're making sure that they're covered with that. OpEx versus CapEx, but customers generally want an OpEx solution. And we have a couple firms that actually follow us that will actually take a CapEx cost today for your enterprise solution, renovation, whatever have you, and they'll convert it to an OpEx cost. In essence, lease it to you for 20, 30 years. It's kind of interesting. And the total cost of ownership versus best practice versus risk, that is what people want to understand on a vendor neutral basis. The 2019 evolution of client leased enterprise data center solutions on premise, it's kind of interesting. This is where you're getting people that are basically leasing it to themselves. An OpEx expenditure, 30-year, ongoing 24/7 support, part of OpEx expenditure, and pay as you grow. Number 4, it talks about the impacts of consolidated transforming. Co-location providers, cloud providers, and we have some of our co-location cloud folks on the line, is that there is a consolidation going on. There's people acquiring, as you've seen in the news and the like, to leverage a great solution. The bottom line is that all these elements have a play and a solution into the overall data center hybrid enterprise solution. I can tell you again, even with third-party support and legal language of damages entering third-party provider contracts, we are actually seeing that now. Customers that were not necessarily cognizant or aware or required years ago are now asking third-party providers, if you have my data, I want you to be liable for $50 million, $100 million, $1 billion. That is a game changer because they want to have a recovery if in the unlikely event that that happens. And edge computing and latency is a key issue. And this is why edge computing is so valuable as it's being deployed throughout. Considerations of scalability, as you can see, a key part is what densities are we looking at? 1 to 3 kW, we call it low density, mid to high range 4 to 10 kW, mid to high level 8 to 16 kW, and high performance computing 16 to 80 kW. And I can say this because I've received permission to say that. So at Columbia University, where we're deploying a high performance compute array, it's up to 60 kilowatts per cabinet, which is significant. So the key is that your solution, wherever it is, be it cloud, be it co-location, be it enterprise, should be able to scale. 6 talks about the candidacy. So what we've defined over the years with our partners, by the way, who deliver those 19 elements, BRUNS-PAK doesn't do that by itself. We have vendor neutral partners that help us deliver that. One is the candidacy of the different types of data requiring different type of data center enterprise facilities reliability. Tier 1 applications are significantly different than Tier 2, Tier 3 versus Tier 4. Tier 4 test and development is ideal candidate for, cloud type of engagements. Tier 2, 3 might be cloud, ideal candidates for co-location. We have seen some very sophisticated, robust Tier 1 applications that, in fact, aren't conducive for the migration to cloud today. So there's a bunch of things that have to be considered with that. And SAP is part of the applications that are robust. And then you get into total cost of ownership versus best practice versus risk. The instant delivery of goods, services, information, and impact to the data center solution. In essence, that is the general criteria, folks. I don't want to spend for excess capacity, be it facility infrastructure, hardware, software, networks, unless I actually can use it, pay as I grow. So that gets into the whole modular, scalable, flexible type of solution. And as you can see, the instant delivery includes artificial intelligence, work process, brick and mortar versus online, driverless vehicles, education, payment methods, video conference versus travel. Even today, the WebEx, the responses that we've received from this is overwhelming. By the way, everybody doesn't have to travel all over God's green earth. It's amazing. So this is a worldwide type of event that in 30 minutes, 45 minutes, it's not traveling around the world. Item 8, the overall impact of cybersecurity compliance, 2019 and beyond. We have a survey. If you'd like to get a survey from our customers about that, feel free to reach out to us and we can deliver this. But cybersecurity, needless to say, is dominating the news. Item number 9 talks about, there's the European Union General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. If you haven't heard about it, it's amazing. May of 2018, lawful, fair, and transparent processing, limitation of purpose, data and storage, data subject rights. By the way, people in Europe have rights to their data. If they're hacked, that person's going to be held responsible. There's consent, it addresses personal data breaches, privacy by design, data production impact assessment, data transfers, data protection officer, and awareness and training. This is significant. If you haven't seen it, this is part of where I believe that Facebook was fined the multi-billions out of Europe. By the way, if you're a European client that actually has data in the United States, you're protected now. So what that means is people that are hosting some European clientele under this act in the United States are getting very concerned about the liability if there's a hack. Item 10, by the way, California, and I won't say anything to you, Evan, but that's okay. California passes a sweeping law to protect online privacy in June of 2018. You can now sue companies with data. So that's a trend. And the question number 11 comes down to, this is inherently where we're going. People say, how many data centers should I have? Where are they located? Where should they be located? I want to reduce the cost and I want immediate flexibility, scalability. So that's an overview of that part. And just being an engineer, I like being 11:19, which we're 1 minute early. Thank you. Let's go on to part 3. Total cost of ownership versus best practice versus risk. So as we go through this now, there are people and groups out there that are tremendous objective referees and the like that go out there. The Gartner Group is outstanding. I mean, they provide, in essence, that's what they are. I believe they're the world's largest consulting group. It actually gives you a vendor neutral appraisal of what is going on, what are the trends. And when I take a step back as we go through this, if you take a look at what I've described as total cost of ownership versus best practice versus risk, envision these silos. 1 is the facility infrastructure. 2 is the compute hardware. 3 is the compute software. 4 is the network. 5 is the cybersecurity. 6 being compliance and regulatory. If you envision those 6 silos, in essence, that encompass those 19 elements, they should all be on best practices scalability, flexibility, modularity, and risk. That's key. So going back to this slide, the Gartner Group is out there, Forrester, IDC. Total cost of ownership, OpEx versus CapEx. People want an OpEx solution. By the way, there's firms, as I said, that will convert your capital expenditure projection and convert that to OpEx. That's the latest trend. Best practices. Best practices are indicating I need to understand what applications, tier 1 to 4, and that's going to drive where their home can or cannot be. The hybrid is absolutely coming into play about part enterprise, part co-location, part cloud, part disaster recovery. In general, by the way, this is all balanced with risk, network, cybersecurity, and compliance. Now, I can say this. If I am running a popcorn machine business, I am not going to be any part of having a data center enterprise or anything of that nature. I will be in the cloud. That is key. So whether it's Amazon, Google, or the large provider, QTS, a whole bunch of folks that are out there that absolutely 1547, you've got some tremendous groups that are out there. Cyrus One, you know, these folks can do it. And they can provide great, great services for this. Evoke is out there. There's a bunch of people that are absolutely outstanding service providers. So again, depending on what business I'm running and how I'm running that, that's absolutely critical to me to go forward. And you have, obviously you have Dell, you have IBM, you have a bunch of great, great NTT folks that are out there that are outstanding in doing this. As we go to number 5, the key is risk. As I was talking to you about, the brand impact, very significant. As most of you folks know or don't know, is that I am paranoid. So one thing about my data security, not that I have much. Okay, clients, you got that? We don't charge enough. I don't have a lot. The point is this. When there's data issues, that has tremendous repercussions. I'm just going back from memory. When Target was hacked years ago through the BMS system of the HVAC system, they indicated back then that Target had an impact financial to them of about $5 billion. They estimated about 10 to 15% of the customers would never return after that event. They ended up firing about 19 of their senior level executives, including their board of directors, after that event. And the repercussions are significant. So risk talks about brand impact, financial impact. If you notice, some of the stocks, when they have some issues, you're talking about multi-millions, sometimes billions of dollars of sway when people get concerned. The stock value is right there. Not only did they lose revenue, but the stock value could be significant. And uptime is always a key part of risk. Co-location and cloud, again, what you want to be able to address is expansion costs. Where are they? What's my renewal going to look like? Moves, adds, and changes. These are all things, again, that the co-location and cloud folks do an outstanding job about identifying, but you want to make sure that you have this underway as part of the data center enterprise solution. Space, compliance, liability, by the way, is absolutely critical. This is getting more so and more so. If somebody has your data, how do I do this? Let's go on to part 5, and then we're 11:25, right on time. This must have been rehearsed. No, it wasn't. Anyhow, recent examples, notes. So this is just an overview of some of the things that are in the news. So Equifax, June 29, 2019. I was reading we're up to $20,000 payment for each individual. By the way, this is before the United States passes regulations that they've been contemplating for a while. And I don't want to turn this into a political discussion, but the government is looking at passing regulations, something similar to the European Act, where there will be responsibility for folks with data issues. But they've volunteered up to $20,000 payment for each individual. And the reason being is if they can settle a class action suit before it even has merit, it's easier for them to put it in the back, in their back window, if you would, rearview mirror. Facebook, fascinating. Multi-billion-dollar fine for data security privacy. I was fascinated. I don't know if I'm more fascinated that it's a multi-billion-dollar fine or the fact that they can write a check for it. That in itself is amazing. But it's coming. And as you can see, they can react to it. But, you know, Facebook's one thing. But when you start talking about some of these other issues, it gets significant. I thought this was interesting because I've been tracking this over the years with Yahoo Legacy when Verizon purchased them. Last year in San Diego, one of the courts, and I'm proud to say I never got out of law school after engineering and MBA, and that's why, but the courts in San Diego ruled Verizon was trying to dismiss the Yahoo Legacy hack. I believe they calculated it was about 1 billion people. And during the course of Verizon's acquisition of Yahoo, by the way, the price went down. It went down significantly because of the fact that as Verizon was becoming more cognizant of what the potential exposures were, it actually cost, Verizon understood that, it cost the Yahoo settlement a lot of dollars. But it was interesting that the San Diego courts would not allow Verizon just to dismiss the Yahoo hacks. That's kind of interesting, and it's precedent setting. A large bank that we just recently completed. Very interesting about where they ended up locating their data and why, and the issues associated with it. Very, very fascinating because in essence, they were very concerned about not only cybersecurity, but some of the critical applications and who would be ultimately responsible for running them, especially their ATMs and things of that nature. One of the projects, too, that we recently completed was a large multinational, a global firm. They went from 29 data centers down to 5. Fascinating. And again, it was driven back to those goals that I was talking to you about. How can I save money? How can I minimize my risk? How can I get the best practices? How can I have a modular, scalable solution? By the way, when they went to 5, part of that data center enterprise solution was all about cloud, co-location, the enterprise part, the tier 1 applications, the synchronous data replication of the tier 1 applications. So it was kind of fascinating. And lastly, the example of Capital One, as you just saw, I believe in the last couple days, 100 million people potentially have our data out there. So I can only thank God I don't have anything because they can take whatever they want. See, Tommy, I got you with that one. Anyhow, so 100 million people. So the issues there are going to be very, very significant moving forward. But in essence, to recap and summarize, the data center consolidation strategy is significant. The 19 elements, as you have seen, have talked about how you put those all together. And there is a definitive process in putting together all those elements. Again, from a vendor neutral standpoint, there's not one size that fits all. Again, there's a process of going through that phase 1 consultative engagement and coming through with total cost of ownership versus best practice versus risk. So having said that, because I wanted to be a minute early for you, Fred, at 11:29, I want to make sure that we now can turn it over to Q&A. I want to thank everybody for their participation. And I just want to recap before I go to Q&A. You can see how does an enterprise start the process of developing a consolidation analysis? That's the engagement. I see the 19 elements of the hybrid solution. Where did they come from? BRUNS-PAK, by the way, basically our experience of working with many, many clients over the past years, that this is what the boards were discussing. Are overall, are all software applications candidates for the cloud? What we found is the answer is no. What does BRUNS-PAK think some critical issues overall in the data center consolidations? There's a series of issues about logistics, location, personnel, network, cybersecurity. There's a myriad of issues that come in with data center consolidations. Latency. How does companies engaging in mergers and acquisitions contemplate consolidation? We're going through that currently right now with a couple of our clients. By the way, they have different compliance and regulatory issues. This is a hardware, software, network compliance regulatory play before we talk about enterprise. And is there a technology process to deliver the consolidation deliverable? The answer is yes. We've delivered this. And is it vendor neutral? The answer is yes. So having said that, I will turn it over to any Q&A. I see some of the Q&As have come in, but we'll start.
So we have a question. How can a business know that their data will be secure in the cloud and will not be hacked?
That's a very good question regarding the data. And if it's in the cloud, how do they know they're not going to be hacked? In essence, there's encryption. There's a whole series of protections that the cloud folks address. But what it really comes down to in our experience, the guarantees are in the contracts and the penalties. That's the way that people back it up now. Next question. So one of the questions that we see here is it says, how do people go and process the data center analysis? You know, how do they go through this? Well, the answer is, the point is what they want to do is make sure that they have everything together, that those elements are at least discussed in the upfront basis. You don't want to necessarily disregard them, even if it's a conversation to bring them in. And the next question that we see has come in, are there strategic plans that all people have for their cloud migration initiatives? And the answer is, there are some people that are pretty further along, that know what they're doing and how they're going about it. But there are a lot of companies that are just touching base out there, and there's a lot of opportunities to provide this vendor neutral delivery. Another question that came in, it talks about the applications. Who has the inventory? That's a good question. The key is the tier 1, 2, 3, 4 applications is critical, in our opinion, before you start this. That is critical. And sometimes some companies, large, massive, might not have the tier 1, 2, 3, 4, and or the interdependencies from the network. This is all critical before a complete strategic plan is developed. Very, very critical. So there are companies, by the way, that just specialize in interdependency mapping and where they go and how they go. When we talk, another question that came in, what levels of cloud candidacy, co-location candidacy do these applications possess? As we indicated, tier 1, 2, 3, 4. That's what we call different candidates. Test and development, non-critical data is a different animal than tier 1 applications. When you talk about patient care applications in the hospital, you want to make sure that they have synchronous data replication. And how have you determined to optimize the facility infrastructure regarding consolidation? That is part of a strategic plan overall. What part enterprise, what part co-location, what part cloud, what's the migration relocation cost, what's the network connectivity cost, what's the cybersecurity impact, what's my repeating cost of network connectivity, how am I taking my tier 1 application from a disaster recovery standpoint, am I running that synchronous data 100 miles down the line? All with regulatory compliance. And the key is uptime. Another question talks about uptime. What should I do with uptime? And how should I do it? Another question that came in.
Generally speaking, what is the annual cost as a percentage of current spend of moving an on-prem data center to the cloud?
That's a good question. And the answer is I don't have that. I don't have that answer, but I will reach out to our partners about that. So repeating the question again, Sean?
Generally, what is the annual cost savings as a percentage of current spend of moving from an on-prem data center to the cloud?
Yeah, and our experience has been when we do the phase 1 deliverable, they have range, but we'll be able to go back and get that range of what caused them to go to cloud. because it is individual customer based specific, because it is interesting. By the way, the goal for everyone is the migration to the cloud and or co-location is a cost savings. That was the intent, right? Cost savings, best practice, and minimizing risk. But it does vary throughout. But in general, when people were doing ROI, they were looking at that total cost of ownership. Now, I can tell you it was not only the cost savings there, but that cost savings included the migration relocation to the cloud, the network connectivity day to day, the versus the keeping the data back at home, the hardware costs. It had a series of things, but I don't have the specific answer, but I will be able to publish a range with that. Finally, the total cost of ownership versus best practice in a mission critical environment is significant, because there are certain firms that, and based on these reports, that will not migrate to the cloud or migrate to co-location and or keep their data home for a variety of different reasons, because risk might outweigh any financial repercussions. We have seen some customers take where they felt their perceived risk and their identified risk of single points of failure indicated that they wanted to keep that data home. Now, on the other side, that's not to represent that if the data is back in an enterprise, it's any more secure than not. The difference being the liability, what we've seen. Some publicly traded companies, the board of directors, what they're trying to do is minimize their risk and exposure. They need to have a recovery in the event that there's something that's out there. We've seen recently that they have put into contracts with third-party managing data. They've actually seen the fact that there's been penalties in these contracts, which is, by the way, upsetting the business model of where should my data reside. So having said that, from an overview standpoint, the other questions that we do see is that how long does this process take? That's a good question. In general, the phase one consultative engagement will be anywhere from 10 to 14 weeks, depending on the size of the enterprise in general. And that 10 to 14 week consulting engagement, the first 4 weeks are all about IT. Before you talk about facilities and things of that nature, it's the interviews of the hardware folks, the software folks, the network folks, about what type of data they have, where it's residing, what their interdependencies are. The second 4 weeks of that engagement is then starting to interpolate the IT into, call it, facility infrastructure requirements, whether in fact that's cloud, whether in fact that's co-location, whether in fact that's enterprise, what does the network look like, how is cybersecurity being addressed? Again, you get into those 19 elements. The last 4 weeks, if you would, is then developing conceptual plans, requirements, scalability, budget estimates, schedules for deployment. By the way, in general, these deployments are not short-term. They are a long-term strategic plan for folks of having a hybrid data center enterprise solution. And it is absolutely outstanding for the stockholders. As they go through this, they want to understand what's my best value. And by the way, if things change in the future, which, by the way, newsflash, we've been doing this for 39 years, 6,000 of these data centers. The point is it will always change in IT. So this has to be modular, scalable, flexible, reliable, that in fact, I can go in either direction. If I acquire a company that was not announced, what's my solution? If I deliver something else, if I start going into high performance computing, how or where's my designated location going to be able to respond to going from a 2 kW load to 40 kW load? Where's the threshold of chilled water? How does that all play? And why does it play? So in summary,
We have one final question before you conclude, Mark, and this is from your buddy in Raritan, from the BP Oval Office. Are your clients seeing a reduction of raised floor space and capacity needs of their in-house data center as a result of the impact of cloud? One question. And two, are they downsizing in-house data centers as a result of this?
The answer is yes on both fronts. Good question, but they are absolutely. We are doing some consolidation evaluations of just the footprint of people saying, hey, I don't need 30,000 square feet right now. I've departed some of my applications to cloud co-location. Absolutely, we're seeing that, in fact, they want to recover that space. They want to optimize that space. And in fact, the footprints being smaller in general are going higher in density. So that is a very good point, because there are people, as this goes on, the legacy portion of the data centers have to be reworked, if you would. So in conclusion, and Mike, that was a great question.
We got one more from, let's see. Just a comment on data, cloud and data security. It should be best practices from an application function. However, from a physical infrastructure standpoint, do not forget physical access to data centers, the room, and even at rack levels.
And that's a good point. Yeah, that's another, young Brian, that's a very good point, because the physical access is another key. Because, you know, it's interesting. If you really want to disrupt operations, or be like a Timothy Leary back in 1968, and I know that's older than most of you folks, the bottom line is you go to the data center operations. So physical security is absolutely critical. CCTV, the retina scanning, things of that nature, because in essence, once you're into a data center, it's significant. And we've toured some of the largest co-location cloud facilities. There was one where they had the military personnel there getting ready to go. So in summary, in conclusion, I wanted to make sure that I know that all you folks are executives. I want to thank you for your time today. I wanted to make sure that I spared the 3 minutes, because that's probably going to affect the gross national product for this afternoon by saving your folks time. But feel free, I appreciate all your interface with the questions and comments. And this video will be available for $19.99 if you're paying cash. No, I'm only kidding. But thank you for your time and efforts. If there's any other questions, feel free to reach out, and have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.